These entitled parents and students had no idea. They just disrespected a woman who survived 15 years cooking in a maximum security prison where one wrong move could cost you your life. Now they're about to learn why you never mess with someone who's seen real consequences. 62-year-old Rosa Martinez had worked as head lunch lady at Oakwood Elementary School for exactly 8 months. And in that time she had become practically invisible to everyone who walked through the bright yellow cafeteria doors. Standing barely 5 feet tall with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, calloused hands that told stories of decades of hard work, and a quiet demeanor that seemed to absorb chaos rather than create it, Rosa appeared to be exactly what most people expected from a school cafeteria worker. Harmless older woman, grateful to have any job at all. The sprawling suburban elementary school served nearly 1,200 students from kindergarten through 5th grade, drawing families from the affluent Meadowbrook neighborhood where house prices started at $500,000, and most parents drove luxury SUVs to drop off their children each morning. Rosa arrived every day at 5:30 a.m., 3 hours before the first student set foot in the building, to begin the massive undertaking of preparing fresh meals for over 1,000 hungry children and staff members. What absolutely nobody at Oakwood Elementary knew about Rosa Martinez was that she had spent the previous 15 years working as head chef at Riverside Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison that housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the state. During her decade and a half behind those concrete walls and razor wire fences, Rosa had learned to command respect from murderers, gang leaders, and violent offenders who could smell weakness from across a crowded mess hall. She had broken up knife fights with nothing but her voice, negotiated peace between rival gangs over food portions, and maintained order in an environment where the slightest sign of disrespect could spark riots that left people permanently injured or dead. Rosa had left the prison system not because she couldn't handle the pressure or the danger, but because her husband Manuel had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease and needed constant care that she couldn't provide while working 12-hour shifts in a facility 40 miles from home. The transition from managing hardened criminals to serving chocolate milk and chicken nuggets to elementary school children should have been a relief. But Rosa quickly discovered that entitled parents and spoiled children presented their own unique challenges that tested her patience in ways she hadn't expected. The cafeteria at Oakwood Elementary was a bright, cheerful space with colorful murals painted by art students, round tables that seated 8 children each, and floor-to-ceiling windows that let in natural light throughout the lunch periods. Rosa worked behind a serving counter that stretched the entire length of the room, efficiently portioning meals, managing inventory, and maintaining the complex food safety protocols required by state regulations. She took genuine pride in ensuring every child received nutritious, properly prepared food, often staying late to accommodate students with special dietary needs or food allergies. Despite her dedication and the obvious improvements in food quality since her arrival, Rosa found herself constantly dealing with complaints, criticism, and outright disrespect from parents who seemed to view her as little more than a servant, whose job was to cater to their every demand. The parent-teacher organization, led by a group of wealthy mothers who treated the school like their personal social club, had made it clear that they considered Rosa's presence temporary and her opinions irrelevant when it came to menu planning or cafeteria policies. The most vocal critic was Jennifer Blackwell, a former marketing executive turned full-time helicopter parent who drove a pristine white Mercedes and wore designer workout clothes to every school function. Jennifer had made it her personal mission to micromanage every aspect of her twin daughter's elementary school experience, from questioning teaching methods to demanding special accommodations that other parents found excessive. She viewed Rosa as an obstacle to her vision of how the cafeteria should operate, frequently making comments about the help and their inability to understand the sophisticated dietary needs of children from good families. Supporting Jennifer's campaign of condescension was Patricia Williams, a real estate attorney who billed clients $300 per hour, but seemed to have unlimited time to spend criticizing the school lunch program. Patricia had filed multiple complaints with the administration about portion sizes, food temperature, and serving procedures, always making sure to speak about Rosa as if she weren't standing right there listening to every word. Her 8-year-old son Bradley had inherited his mother's entitled attitude, regularly making demands about special treatment and throwing tantrums when Rosa explained that all children received the same portions and followed the same rules. Third member of this toxic trio was Amanda Foster, whose husband owned a chain of expensive restaurants throughout the metropolitan area and who considered herself an expert on food service despite never having worked a day in the industry. Amanda delighted in pointing out perceived flaws in Rosa's cooking methods, questioning her understanding of nutrition, and making suggestions for menu changes that would have tripled the food budget while serving half the students. Her 10-year-old daughter Madison had learned to echo her mother's complaints, often loudly announcing her dissatisfaction with meals in front of other children. Rosa endured their constant criticism with the same stoic patience she had developed during her years in the prison system, understanding that responding to provocation would only escalate situations and potentially jeopardize her employment. She needed this job not just for the steady paycheck and health insurance, but because the regular schedule allowed her to spend evenings and weekends caring for Manuel, whose condition was deteriorating more rapidly than doctors had initially predicted. Every morning as she tied her apron and began preparing meals, Rosa reminded herself that these privileged parents had never faced real hardship or genuine danger, and their petty complaints were nothing compared to the life-or-death situations she had navigated daily for 15 years. The pattern of disrespect had become so routine that other staff members had begun to notice and comment privately about how poorly Rosa was being treated. Sarah Chun, a third-grade teacher who often ate lunch in the cafeteria, frequently witnessed Jennifer and her friends making dismissive comments about getting real food for their children instead of whatever that woman is serving. Tom Rodriguez, the custodial supervisor who had worked at Oakwood for 12 years, had overheard parents referring to Rosa as just the lunch lady and questioning whether she was even legally authorized to work in the United States. Despite her perfect English and obvious competence, the school principal, Dr. Michael Thompson, was aware of the tension but had chosen to avoid confrontation with the parent-teacher organization, which donated significant money to school programs and wielded considerable influence with the district administration. Dr. Thompson had hired Rosa based on her impressive credentials and spotless employment record, but he had not shared details about her previous experience with other staff members or parents. Respecting her privacy and assuming that her professional background was irrelevant to her current role, Rosa's quiet strength and unflappable demeanor had been forged in an environment where showing weakness could result in violence, where earning respect meant proving yourself capable of handling any situation that arose, and where maintaining order required a combination of firm boundaries and strategic thinking that most people would never understand. She had spent 15 years proving herself to some of the most dangerous people in society, earning their respect through consistency, fairness, and an unwavering refusal to be intimidated by threats or manipulation, the skills Rosa had developed during her prison years extended far beyond cooking for large groups under pressure. She had learned to read people's intentions from subtle body language, to de-escalate volatile situations before they exploded into violence, and to command authority without raising her voice or making threats. She understood power dynamics, group psychology, and the difference between genuine leadership and empty posturing in ways that most people never would. Jennifer Blackwell, Patricia Williams, and Amanda Foster had transformed complaining about the school lunch program into their primary form of entertainment, treating Rosa's presence in the cafeteria like a personal affront to their elevated social status. These three women had known each other since their children were toddlers, bonding over expensive mommy and me classes, exclusive country club memberships, and a shared belief that their wealth entitled them to special treatment wherever they went. Jennifer Blackwell stood as the undisputed leader of this privileged trio, a woman who had never heard the word no applied to any request she had made in her 43 years of existence. Her husband Richard owned a successful chain of luxury car dealerships throughout the tri-state area, generating enough income to support Jennifer's lifestyle of designer shopping, weekly spa treatments, and elaborate vacations to European destinations she photographed extensively for her social media followers. Jennifer had abandoned her marketing career the moment her first daughter was born, redirecting her considerable energy and organizational skills toward controlling every aspect of her children's lives and the institutions they attended. Standing nearly 6 feet tall in her ever-present designer heels, Jennifer commanded attention wherever she went with her perfectly styled blonde hair, immaculate makeup that required 2 hours of morning preparation, and an extensive wardrobe of clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. She had mastered the art of smiling while delivering cutting insults, speaking in a tone that remained superficially polite while making it abundantly clear that she considered herself superior to anyone who worked for a living rather than married into wealth. Patricia Williams brought legal training and ruthless attention to detail to the group's campaign against Rosa, having built her reputation as a real estate attorney by finding loopholes and exploiting weaknesses in contracts that less experienced lawyers had missed. At 45, Patricia had never lost a case or backed down from a fight, approaching every interaction like a negotiation where she held all the advantages. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of expensive business suits that she wore to every school function, treating parent-teacher conferences and cafeteria inspections with the same intensity she brought to million-dollar property deals. Patricia's husband David was a cardiac surgeon at the city's most prestigious hospital, and their combined income placed them firmly in the top 1% of earners in their affluent community. Patricia had used her legal expertise to file formal complaints about Rosa's performance with the school district, carefully documenting every perceived violation of policy or procedure, while building a case that she believed would eventually result in Rosa's termination. She approached motherhood like a litigation strategy, gathering evidence and building arguments to support her position that her son Bradley deserved special treatment that other children should not receive. Amanda Foster completed their triumvirate of entitlement, bringing what she considered extensive food service expertise gained through her marriage to restaurant owner Marcus Foster, whose family had built a dining empire that stretched across 3 states. Amanda had never actually worked in any of these restaurants, but she had attended enough industry events and charity galas to convince herself that she understood the complexities of food preparation, service, and management better than people who had spent decades learning these skills through actual experience. At 39, Amanda was the youngest member of the group, but compensated for her relative youth with an aggressive perfectionism that extended to every aspect of her carefully curated lifestyle. Her daily routine included 2 hours at an exclusive fitness club, another hour with a personal trainer, and regular appointments with stylists, estheticians, and wellness experts who helped maintain her appearance as the wife of a successful businessman. Amanda treated her role as a mother like a competitive sport, constantly comparing her daughter Madison's achievements to those of other children, while ensuring that Madison understood her inherent superiority over classmates from less privileged backgrounds. The 3 women had spent months developing their strategy for undermining Rosa's position at Oakwood Elementary, beginning with subtle comments about food quality and gradually escalating to direct challenges of her authority and competence. They had recruited other parents to their cause by spreading rumors about health code violations, questioning Rosa's qualifications, and suggesting that the school could hire a more professional food service company if they applied enough pressure. To the administration, their campaign had become increasingly bold as they realized that Rosa never responded to their provocations with anything stronger than polite deflection. They interpreted her quiet professionalism as weakness and her refusal to engage in confrontation as evidence that she could be easily intimidated or pushed into resignation. None of them had bothered to research Rosa's background or consider that her calm demeanor might reflect strength rather than timidity. Jennifer had made it her personal mission to document what she considered Rosa's failures, arriving at the cafeteria during lunch periods with her phone ready to record any interaction that could be used as evidence of inadequate service. She had created a group chat with Patricia and Amanda where they shared daily complaints about portion sizes, food temperature, menu choices, and Rosa's responses to their special requests. The chat had grown to include dozens of other parents who enjoyed participating in the coordinated criticism of someone they viewed as powerless to defend herself. Patricia had escalated their campaign by demanding meetings with Principal Thompson, presenting thick folders of documentation that she claimed proved Rosa was unfit for her position. She had researched food service regulations, health department requirements, and district policies to build what she considered an airtight case for Rosa's dismissal. Patricia approached these meetings with the same aggressive confidence she brought to real estate negotiations, assuming that volume and persistence would eventually overwhelm any opposition to her demands. Amanda had focused on recruiting other parents to boycott the school lunch program, organizing elaborate campaigns to provide alternative meals for children whose parents agreed that Rosa's cooking was unsuitable for their offspring. She had created detailed spreadsheets comparing the nutritional content of school meals to expensive organic alternatives, conveniently ignoring the fact that Rosa was required to work within budget constraints that Amanda had never faced in her privileged lifestyle. The three women had also begun targeting Rosa's interactions with students, looking for any opportunity to accuse her of inappropriate behavior or inadequate supervision. They had coached their children to report any perceived slight or disappointment, no matter how minor, as evidence of Rosa's inability to properly serve young children. Jennifer's twin daughters had been instructed to document their lunch experiences in detail, creating what Jennifer considered a record of Rosa's professional inadequacies. Their sense of untouchable superiority had been reinforced by years of getting their way through persistence, financial influence, and social connections that they assumed would protect them from any consequences for their behavior. Jennifer had successfully pressured 3 different teachers to change grades for her daughters. Patricia had used legal threats to reverse disciplinary actions against her son, and Amanda had convinced the administration to modify school policies to accommodate her family's special requests. None of them had ever encountered someone who couldn't be intimidated by their wealth, social status, or professional credentials. They had built their identities around the assumption that service workers, teachers, and other people they considered beneath their social class would always defer to their authority and accept their criticism without challenge. Their treatment of Rosa reflected a worldview where people who worked for hourly wages were inherently inferior and should be grateful for any employment, regardless of how they were treated by their social superiors. The 3 women had convinced themselves that their campaign against Rosa was motivated by genuine concern for their children's welfare rather than personal entertainment or social prejudice. They genuinely believed that their wealth and education gave them special insight into proper food service that Rosa, despite her years of professional experience, could never possess. Their confidence in their own righteousness had grown with each perceived victory, creating a dangerous combination of arrogance and ignorance that would soon lead them into a confrontation they were completely unprepared to handle. What none of the entitled parents at Oakwood Elementary could have imagined was that Rosa Martinez carried within her quiet demeanor the hard-earned wisdom and unshakable authority that came from 15 years of managing one of the most dangerous kitchens in the American prison system. Riverside Correctional Facility wasn't just any prison. It was a maximum security institution that housed murderers, gang leaders, drug kingpins, and violent offenders who had been deemed too dangerous for medium security facilities. During her decade and a half at Riverside, Rosa had been responsible for feeding 2,800 inmates 3 meals a day, managing a kitchen staff of 42 convicted felons, and maintaining order in an environment where a dispute over food portions could trigger riots that left people hospitalized or dead. The prison kitchen operated under conditions that would have broken most professional chefs within weeks: constant threat of violence, zero tolerance for mistakes, and the knowledge that showing even a moment of weakness could result in catastrophic consequences. Rosa's journey to Riverside had begun 23 years earlier when she was a single mother struggling to support her infant son, Miguel, after her first husband abandoned them without warning. She had started as a prep cook at a small restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, working 16-hour days to make ends meet while attending culinary school at night. Her natural talent for cooking and exceptional work ethic caught the attention of Chef Antonio Valdez, a James Beard Award winner who became her mentor and helped her develop the skills that would eventually make her one of the most respected kitchen managers in the correctional system. When Miguel was 5 years old, Rosa applied for a position at Riverside Correctional Facility because the salary was double what she could earn in any civilian kitchen, and the benefits package included health insurance and educational assistance that would allow her to provide a better life for her son. The warden who hired her was Captain James Morrison, a 30-year veteran of the corrections system who had seen dozens of kitchen managers quit within their first month because they couldn't handle the psychological pressure of working with violent criminals. Rosa's first day at Riverside had been a brutal introduction to the realities of prison life. She walked into a kitchen where the previous manager had been hospitalized after a disagreement with an inmate, escalated into a full-scale brawl involving 23 prisoners and 6 guards. The kitchen staff consisted entirely of convicted felons who had been assigned to food service, including Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, a former gang enforcer serving life without parole for multiple homicides, and Timothy "Razor" Jackson, a notorious drug dealer whose network had controlled narcotics distribution across 3 states before his arrest. Within her first week, Rosa faced her first major test when Tank Rodriguez decided to challenge her authority by deliberately contaminating an entire batch of soup that was meant to feed 800 inmates. Instead of reporting the incident to the guards or backing down from the confrontation, Rosa calmly threw away the ruined food, looked Tank directly in the eyes, and told him that his next act of sabotage would result in consequences that would make his life considerably more difficult. Tank had expected Rosa to show fear or call for backup, but instead, he encountered someone who spoke to him with the same calm authority she would use with any professional colleague who had made an unacceptable mistake. Rosa's response caught him completely off guard because most civilian staff members either treated inmates like dangerous animals or tried to befriend them to avoid conflict. Rosa did neither. She treated everyone in her kitchen like professionals who were expected to meet her standards, regardless of their criminal history. The turning point in Rosa's relationship with the inmate kitchen staff came 3 months into her tenure when a riot broke out in the main cell block during dinner service. Guards were pulled away from the kitchen to help control the violence, leaving Rosa alone with 42 convicted felons who suddenly realized that no one was watching them. The situation could have turned deadly within minutes, but Rosa never stopped working, never showed fear, and never acknowledged that anything unusual was happening. When Tank Rodriguez approached her during the chaos and asked what she wanted them to do, Rosa simply said, "We have 1,700 men who haven't eaten dinner yet. Get back to work." Her complete lack of panic or concern about being outnumbered by dangerous criminals earned her a level of respect that most guards never achieved despite years of training and armed backup. From that day forward, Rosa's kitchen became known throughout Riverside as neutral territory, where conflicts were left at the door and everyone followed her rules. Over the following years, Rosa developed a reputation that extended far beyond the walls of Riverside Correctional Facility. She had created order in chaos, transformed a dysfunctional kitchen into a model of efficiency, and earned the respect of men who had never respected authority in their lives. Prison officials from other facilities began requesting tours of Rosa's operation, trying to understand how she had achieved what trained corrections officers often couldn't accomplish with weapons and backup. Rosa's success came from her ability to see past the criminals' reputations and focus on their potential as kitchen workers. She discovered that Tank Rodriguez had grown up helping his grandmother run a small restaurant in East LA and possessed natural culinary instincts that had been buried under decades of violence and anger. She gave him responsibilities that challenged his skills while making it clear that her trust was contingent on his continued professional behavior. Timothy Razor Jackson revealed unexpected organizational abilities when Rosa put him in charge of inventory management. His experience running a complex drug distribution network translated perfectly to managing food supplies, ensuring that every ingredient was accounted for and delivered exactly when needed. Rosa's willingness to utilize his skills while maintaining clear boundaries about acceptable behavior gave him the first legitimate respect he had experienced since childhood. The most dangerous test of Rosa's authority came during her 7th year at Riverside when a new inmate named Carlos Viper Mendoza arrived with a reputation for violence that made even seasoned gang members nervous. Viper had killed 3 men in prison fights at his previous facility and was transferred to Riverside specifically because administrators believed Rosa's kitchen was the only place where he might be controlled without constant armed supervision. Viper's first week in Rosa's kitchen was a carefully orchestrated series of challenges designed to test her limits and establish his dominance over what he assumed would be an easy target. He deliberately ruined food, started arguments with other inmates, and made increasingly explicit threats about what would happen to Rosa if she tried to discipline him for his behavior. Other kitchen staff watched nervously, waiting to see whether Rosa would finally meet someone she couldn't handle. The confrontation came when Viper deliberately knocked a full pot of soup off the stove, sending scalding liquid across the floor, and creating a dangerous situation that could have seriously injured several people. Instead of calling for guards or retreating to safety, Rosa walked calmly over to Viper, looked him directly in the eyes, and spoke in a voice that carried 15 years of absolute authority in one of the most dangerous environments in America. "Clean it up," she said simply, her tone conveying complete confidence that her order would be followed without question or delay. The entire kitchen fell silent as 200 pounds of muscle and violence faced off against a 5-foot-tall grandmother who showed no fear whatsoever. Viper had intimidated judges, prosecutors, guards, and other inmates throughout his criminal career, but he had never encountered someone who looked at him and saw nothing more threatening than a child having a tantrum. After 30 seconds of staring into Rosa's unwavering gaze, Viper quietly picked up a mop and began cleaning the mess he had created. He never challenged her authority again, and within 6 months had become one of her most reliable workers. Years later, after his release, Viper would tell people that Rosa Martinez was the first person in his life who had shown him respect, while demanding that he earn it through his actions rather than his reputation for violence. By the time Rosa left Riverside to care for her husband Manuel, she had transformed the prison kitchen into a model facility that operated with the efficiency of a high-end restaurant and the discipline of a military unit. She had earned commendations from state corrections officials, been featured in professional publications, and trained dozens of kitchen managers who went on to implement her methods at facilities across the country. The respect Rosa commanded at Riverside wasn't based on fear or manipulation. It was built on her absolute consistency, her fair treatment of everyone under her authority, and her refusal to be intimidated by people whose entire identity was built around intimidating others. She had faced down killers, gang leaders, and psychopaths who would have terrified trained soldiers, and she had done it all while maintaining the same calm professionalism that she now brought to serving chicken nuggets and chocolate milk to elementary school children. The systematic campaign of harassment against Rosa had evolved into a carefully orchestrated routine that Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda executed with the precision of military strategists conducting psychological warfare. Every school day brought new opportunities for them to demonstrate their perceived superiority, while chipping away at Rosa's professional dignity through 1,000 small cuts, designed to make her question her worth and competence. Jennifer had established herself as the primary coordinator of their daily assault on Rosa's peace of mind, arriving at the school each morning with a mental checklist of complaints and criticisms that she would deploy throughout the day. Her twin daughters Emma and Sophie had been thoroughly coached to report every minor disappointment or perceived slight back to their mother, who would then transform these childhood grievances into evidence of Rosa's professional inadequacy. If the mashed potatoes were slightly cool, if the green beans weren't perfectly seasoned, if Rosa took 30 seconds longer than usual to serve their portions, Jennifer would treat these minor variations as major failures worthy of formal complaints. To the administration, the cafeteria had become Jennifer's personal theater, where she performed daily shows of entitled indignation for an audience of other parents who had learned to expect entertainment whenever she encountered Rosa. Jennifer would arrive during lunch service wearing her most expensive outfits, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear as she questioned Rosa's cooking methods, criticized portion sizes, and made suggestions for improvements that Rosa obviously couldn't implement without administrative approval and budget increases. Patricia had transformed her legal training into a weapon designed to intimidate Rosa through bureaucratic warfare that she assumed would overwhelm someone she viewed as an uneducated service worker. She had spent countless hours researching federal nutrition guidelines, state health department regulations, and district policy manuals to find obscure requirements that she could cite during her confrontations with Rosa. Patricia would arrive at the cafeteria with printed copies of regulations, speaking in legal terminology while pointing out what she claimed were violations of various codes and statutes. Her son Bradley had inherited his mother's entitled attitude and had begun treating Rosa like a personal servant whose job was to cater to his individual preferences regardless of established rules or other students' needs. Bradley would demand special portions, complain loudly when Rosa explained that all children received equal treatment, and report back to his mother. Whenever Rosa maintained professional boundaries instead of giving him preferential treatment, Patricia had taught Bradley that his family's wealth and status meant that normal rules didn't apply to him, and she expected Rosa to reinforce this lesson by providing the special treatment that Bradley had learned to expect from other adults. Amanda had focused her efforts on undermining Rosa's credibility with other parents by spreading rumors about health code violations, questioning Rosa's qualifications, and suggesting that the school could hire a more professional food service company if they applied enough pressure to the administration. She had created elaborate social media posts comparing school lunch portions to expensive organic meals she prepared for her daughter Madison, conveniently ignoring the budget constraints and nutritional requirements that governed Rosa's menu. Planning, Madison Foster had become a miniature version of her mother, arriving at the cafeteria each day with predetermined complaints about whatever food was being served. If Rosa offered chicken nuggets, Madison would announce that they were too dry. If the menu featured pizza, Madison would declare that the cheese wasn't the right type. If Rosa served fresh fruit, Madison would claim that it wasn't organic and therefore unsuitable for someone from her family's social class. Amanda had taught her daughter that criticizing people in service positions was not only acceptable but necessary to maintain their family's superior status, The three women had also begun recruiting other parents to join their campaign against Rosa by hosting coffee meetings where they shared their complaints and encouraged others to document their own grievances. These gatherings had become social events where privileged mothers bonded over their shared disdain for someone they viewed as beneath their social class, turning criticism of Rosa into a form of entertainment that reinforced their sense of superiority. Their harassment had escalated beyond mere complaints about food quality to personal attacks on Rosa's appearance, accent, and perceived social status. Jennifer would make comments about Rosa's simple clothing and practical hairstyle, suggesting that someone who looked so unprofessional couldn't possibly prepare food that met their standards. Patricia would question Rosa's English comprehension whenever she didn't immediately comply with unreasonable demands, speaking slowly and loudly as if Rosa were intellectually impaired rather than professionally maintaining boundaries. Amanda had begun bringing other restaurant owners' wives to observe Rosa's work, introducing them as experts who could evaluate whether Rosa's methods met professional standards. These staged inspections were designed to humiliate Rosa by treating her like an incompetent employee whose every move required supervision by people who had never actually worked in food service but considered themselves qualified to judge others. Based on their marriages to Keys, successful businessmen, that the psychological pressure had been building for months as Rosa endured daily humiliations while maintaining her professional composure and focusing on her primary responsibility of feeding over 1,000 children nutritious meals. She had survived 15 years in a maximum security prison kitchen where showing weakness could result in violence, but the constant barrage of petty cruelty from entitled parents tested her patience in ways that armed criminals never had. Rosa's colleagues had begun expressing concern about the treatment she was receiving, but the school administration seemed reluctant to confront parents who wielded significant financial and political influence within the community. Dr. Thompson had received Rosa's exemplary performance evaluations and knew that her cooking skills and kitchen management were far superior to any previous food service staff. But he also understood that Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda represented families whose donations and volunteer work were considered essential to the school's success. The daily harassment had begun affecting other students who witnessed the cruel treatment of someone they had grown to respect and appreciate. Many children genuinely enjoyed Rosa's cooking and looked forward to lunch periods, but they could see that she was being treated unfairly by adults who seemed to take pleasure in making her job more difficult. Some students had begun defending Rosa when they heard other children repeating their parents' criticisms, creating tension within the student body that reflected the adult conflicts playing out in the cafeteria. Rosa's quiet strength had been forged in an environment where maintaining composure under pressure wasn't just professional courtesy, it was a survival skill that could mean the difference between life and death. She had learned to read aggressive behavior, assess threats, and respond appropriately to challenges that would have overwhelmed most people. The entitled behavior of privileged parents who had never faced real consequences for their actions was annoying rather than threatening. But Rosa understood that their escalating campaign of harassment was approaching a point where she would need to establish clear boundaries. The pattern of abuse had become so routine that Rosa could predict exactly what each day would bring, based on which parents were scheduled to volunteer or visit the school. Jennifer's days meant loud complaints and public criticism designed to humiliate Rosa in front of other parents and staff members. Patricia's visits involved lengthy lectures about regulations and requirements that Rosa supposedly didn't understand. Amanda's appearances featured condescending suggestions for improvements that revealed her complete ignorance of institutional food service realities. Rosa had endured their systematic campaign of disrespect with the same stoic patience she had developed during her years managing violent criminals who tested her authority through far more dangerous methods. She understood that responding to their provocations would only escalate the situation and potentially jeopardize her employment, which she needed to support her husband's medical care. Every morning as she prepared meals for the day ahead, Rosa reminded herself that these parents had never faced genuine hardship or learned the difference between authority earned through competence and power derived from privilege. The three women had convinced themselves that their treatment of Rosa was justified by their superior education, wealth, and social status, never considering that their behavior revealed more about their character than Rosa's professional capabilities. They had mistaken her quiet professionalism for weakness and her refusal to engage in public confrontations as evidence that she could be intimidated or pushed into resignation. None of them had bothered to research Rosa's background or consider that someone who remained calm under their constant pressure might possess strengths they couldn't imagine. What drove Rosa to endure months of systematic humiliation wasn't fear of confrontation or lack of backbone, it was her absolute devotion to Manuel Martinez, the man who had rescued her from despair and given her a love worth any sacrifice. 21 years earlier, when Rosa was struggling as a single mother working grueling shifts at Riverside Correctional Facility, Manuel had been the soft-spoken maintenance supervisor who fixed broken equipment in her kitchen and somehow managed to make her smile even during the most stressful days of her career. Manuel had been different from any man Rosa had ever known. While other men were intimidated by her strength and independence, Manuel admired her ability to command respect from dangerous criminals while maintaining her compassion and integrity. He would arrive at the prison kitchen at dawn to repair malfunctioning ovens or refrigeration units, working quietly and efficiently while Rosa managed her team of inmate cooks. Their relationship had developed slowly over 2 years of shared morning conversations before Manuel finally gathered the courage to ask Rosa to dinner at a small family restaurant near the prison. Their courtship had been a gentle dance between two people who had learned to be cautious with their hearts. Rosa had been abandoned by her first husband when Miguel was an infant, leaving her suspicious of men who made promises they might not keep. Manuel had lost his first wife to cancer 5 years earlier and was raising his teenage daughter Carmen alone while working multiple jobs to support them both. Neither was looking for romance, but they found in each other a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine understanding of life's challenges. Manuel's proposal had come 3 years into their relationship, during a quiet Sunday morning in Rosa's small apartment while she cooked breakfast and he helped Miguel with homework. There were no elaborate gestures or expensive rings, just Manuel's simple declaration that he wanted to spend the rest of his life supporting Rosa's dreams while building a family together. Rosa had said yes while tears streamed down her face, finally believing that she deserved the kind of love that Manuel offered without conditions or expectations of change. Their marriage had been everything Rosa had dreamed of during her lonely years as a single mother. Manuel had embraced Miguel as his own son, attending every school event and coaching his little league team with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. Rosa had gained not just a husband, but a daughter in Carmen, who had initially been suspicious of her father's new relationship but gradually came to see Rosa as the mother figure she had missed since childhood. Manuel had been Rosa's anchor during the most difficult years at Riverside, providing emotional support when violent incidents shook her confidence and celebrating her professional achievements when she received commendations from state corrections officials. He understood that Rosa's work was more than just a job, it was a calling that allowed her to bring order and dignity to an environment where both were rare commodities. Manuel never asked her to quit or find safer employment because he recognized that Rosa's strength came from meeting challenges that would have defeated most people. Their home had become a sanctuary where Rosa could decompress from the psychological pressure of managing violent criminals, while Manuel shared stories from his work maintaining the infrastructure that kept their community functioning. They had developed rituals of morning coffee together before their early shifts, evening walks through their neighborhood while discussing their day, and weekend projects that transformed their modest house into a warm family refuge filled with laughter and love. The first signs of Manuel's cognitive decline had appeared 18 months earlier. During a conversation about their weekend plans, when he struggled to remember the name of their favorite restaurant where they had celebrated every anniversary for 15 years. Rosa initially dismissed the incident as normal aging, but similar episodes became more frequent and concerning. Manuel would forget important appointments, lose track of conversations mid-sentence, and become confused about familiar locations that he had navigated for decades. The official diagnosis of early-onset Alzheimer's disease had arrived like a devastating blow that shattered Rosa's carefully constructed life plans. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the neurologist who delivered the news, explained that Manuel's condition would deteriorate progressively and unpredictably, requiring increasing levels of care that would eventually include full-time supervision. The disease typically progressed over 7 to 10 years, but Manuel's symptoms were advancing more rapidly than average, suggesting that his decline might accelerate beyond initial projections. Rosa's decision to leave Riverside Correctional Facility had been the most difficult professional choice of her career, but she made it without hesitation because Manuel's needs took precedence over everything else in her life. The prison warden had offered to arrange a modified schedule that might allow Rosa to continue working while providing care for Manuel, but she understood that Alzheimer's patients required consistency and attention that part-time arrangements couldn't provide. The transition from managing a maximum security prison kitchen to serving elementary school children had represented a massive reduction in both salary and professional prestige. But Rosa embraced her new role because it offered the schedule flexibility she needed to care for Manuel properly. Working at Oakwood Elementary allowed her to be home by late afternoon, providing the evening care that Manuel required, while still maintaining the health insurance benefits that covered his expensive medications and medical appointments. Manuel's condition had continued deteriorating during Rosa's months at Oakwood, creating a daily reality that broke her heart while strengthening her resolve to protect him from any additional stress or upheaval. Some mornings he would wake up confused about where he was, not recognizing their bedroom or understanding why Rosa was in his house. Other days he would seem almost normal, helping with household tasks and engaging in conversations that reminded Rosa of the man she had fallen in love with decades earlier. The unpredictability of Manuel's symptoms meant that Rosa never knew what kind of day awaited her when she returned home from work. He might be sitting calmly at the kitchen table reading a newspaper, or she might find him wandering through the house looking for his long-deceased mother. The disease had begun affecting his ability to recognize familiar faces, and Rosa lived in constant fear of the day when Manuel would look at her without understanding who she was or why she claimed to love him. Rosa's commitment to maintaining her employment at Oakwood Elementary wasn't just about the paycheck. It was about preserving the stability that Manuel needed during his lucid moments when he still took pride in Rosa's professional achievements. He would ask about her day at work, listen to stories about the children she served, and offer encouragement when she faced challenges with difficult parents or administrative demands. These conversations reminded Rosa that underneath the confusion and memory loss, Manuel's loving nature remained intact. The financial pressure of Manuel's medical care had forced Rosa to make sacrifices that would have been unthinkable during her higher-earning years at Riverside. Alzheimer's medications cost hundreds of dollars per month, even with insurance coverage, and the specialized care that Manuel would eventually require could exhaust their savings within a few years. Rosa had already sold jewelry, canceled vacation plans, and eliminated every unnecessary expense to ensure that Manuel received the best possible treatment. The emotional toll of watching Manuel's gradual decline while enduring daily humiliation from entitled parents had pushed Rosa's resilience to its absolute limits. Every evening she would return home from Jennifer's complaints and Patricia's legal threats to find Manuel struggling with basic tasks that had once been second nature to him. She would help him remember how to use familiar appliances, guide him through conversations with confused thoughts, and provide comfort when he became frightened by his own mental confusion. Rosa's love for Manuel had given her the strength to survive 15 years in a maximum security prison, build a successful career under impossible conditions, and now face the devastating reality of losing him gradually to a disease that would eventually erase every shared memory they had created together. That same love made her willing to endure any amount of disrespect from people who had never faced real hardship if it meant maintaining the employment that allowed her to care for the most important person in her world. The cruel irony of Rosa's situation wasn't lost on her. She had commanded respect from murderers and gang leaders who understood strength when they encountered it. But now she was being systematically humiliated by privileged parents who mistook her restraint for weakness. Rosa's patience with their behavior stemmed from her absolute focus on protecting Manuel from any additional stress or uncertainty that might accelerate his decline or compromise the care he needed to maintain whatever quality of life remained possible. The breaking point arrived on a blustery Thursday morning in late November, when the autumn air carried the promise of winter and children hurried through the school hallways wearing sweaters and jackets their parents had reluctantly retrieved from storage. Rosa had arrived at Oakwood Elementary before dawn as usual, spending 3 hours preparing a special Thanksgiving feast that would give over 1,000 students their first taste of traditional holiday foods before the week-long break that began the following day. Rosa had spent her own money purchasing higher quality ingredients than the district budget typically allowed, wanting to create a memorable meal that would bring joy to children whose families might not celebrate Thanksgiving with elaborate dinners. She had prepared fresh cranberry sauce from scratch, seasoned the turkey with herbs from her own garden, and made stuffing using a recipe that Manuel's grandmother had passed down through 3 generations of their family. The kitchen filled with aromas that reminded Rosa of happier times when Manuel could still help her cook holiday meals without becoming confused about basic ingredients and measurements. The morning had started with genuine excitement as students entered the cafeteria and saw the special decorations Rosa had purchased and hung before school began. Paper turkeys, autumn leaves, and harvest cornucopias transformed the usually sterile institutional space into something that felt festive and welcoming. Children who normally showed little interest in school lunch were eagerly discussing the promised feast, and even teachers who typically ate in their classrooms had decided to join the celebration. Jennifer Blackwell arrived at the school that morning in a particularly foul mood because her planned Thanksgiving vacation to a luxury resort in the Bahamas had been canceled due to her husband's unexpected business crisis. She had spent the previous evening rearranging elaborate holiday plans while listening to Richard explain that 3 major deals were falling apart simultaneously, requiring his immediate attention instead of the relaxing getaway she had been anticipating for months. Jennifer's disappointment had transformed into barely contained rage that needed a target, and Rosa represented the perfect outlet for frustrations that had nothing to do with school lunch service. Patricia Williams had also arrived at Oakwood Elementary that morning, carrying the weight of professional disappointments that had accumulated throughout a difficult week. 2 major real estate deals had collapsed due to financing issues beyond her control. A prestigious client had fired her firm over a minor paperwork error made by a junior associate, and her son Bradley had been suspended from his elite soccer team for unsportsmanlike conduct that Patricia knew reflected poorly on her parenting. The combination of professional setbacks and personal embarrassment had left Patricia looking for someone to blame for problems that were largely of her own making. Amanda Foster completed the trio of frustrated wealthy women seeking outlets for their various disappointments and resentments. Her husband Marcus had informed her the previous evening that their restaurant, Shane was facing severe financial difficulties due to rising food costs and labor shortages that threatened several locations with closure. Amanda's comfortable lifestyle depended entirely on Marcus's business success, and the possibility of financial uncertainty had triggered panic attacks that she managed by focusing her anxiety on targets that couldn't fight back effectively. The three women had coordinated their arrival at the school to coincide with the Thanksgiving lunch service, having decided that Rosa's special meal represented a perfect opportunity to demonstrate their superiority while undermining her confidence. In front of the largest possible audience, they had spent the previous evening planning their attack via text messages and phone calls, sharing strategies for maximum humiliation, while congratulating themselves on their cleverness and righteousness. Jennifer positioned herself near the serving line where her voice would carry throughout the cafeteria, speaking loudly enough to ensure that students, teachers, and other parents could hear every word of her planned criticism. She began by questioning the safety of food that had obviously been prepared hours earlier, suggesting that Rosa's turkey might be contaminated with bacteria that could make children seriously ill. Her accusations were delivered with the confident authority of someone who had never worked in food service, but assumed that her expensive education qualified her to evaluate professional cooking methods. Patricia approached the confrontation from a different angle, pulling out printed copies of federal nutrition guidelines and state health department regulations that she claimed Rosa was violating through her menu choices and preparation methods. She spoke in legal terminology while pointing out supposed infractions that could result in fines, lawsuits, and potential closure of the school's food service program. Patricia's aggressive interrogation was designed to make Rosa appear incompetent and potentially dangerous to the children she served daily. Amanda focused her attack on the quality and presentation of Rosa's carefully prepared meal, comparing it unfavorably to expensive catered events she had attended at Marcus's restaurants. She loudly proclaimed that the turkey was overcooked, the stuffing was too dry, the cranberry sauce was too tart, and the overall presentation was unprofessional compared to what parents should expect for their children. Amanda's criticism was particularly cruel because she knew that Rosa had spent her own money and extra time trying to create something special for the students. The coordinated assault reached its crescendo when Jennifer declared that she was going to file formal complaints with the school district, the health department, and the state education board about Rosa's obvious incompetence and potential negligence. She announced her intention to organize a parent petition demanding Rosa's immediate termination and replacement with a professional catering company that could provide meals worthy of Oakwood Elementary's reputation and standards. But the moment that transformed Rosa's patient endurance into righteous fury came when Patricia Williams made a statement that crossed every line of human decency and professional respect. Looking directly at Rosa while ensuring that her words would be heard by everyone in the crowded cafeteria, Patricia declared in a voice dripping with contempt and superiority, "Maybe if you spent less time pretending to cook real food and more time learning to speak proper English, you could find a job that doesn't require the taxpayers to subsidize your obvious inability to contribute anything meaningful to our community." Patricia's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud as the entire cafeteria fell silent, with hundreds of children and dozens of adults suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something far more serious than typical parent complaints about school lunch. Teachers stopped their conversations mid-sentence. Students paused with forks halfway to their mouths, and other parents stepped back instinctively, as if sensing that a dangerous line had been crossed by someone who didn't understand the consequences of their actions. Rosa felt something fundamental shift deep inside her chest as Patricia's racist attack registered fully in her consciousness. For months, she had endured complaints about food temperature, portion sizes, and menu choices with the patience of someone who understood that entitled parents often used service workers as outlets for their personal frustrations. She had absorbed criticism about her cooking methods, her appearance, and her professional qualifications, because she needed this job to care for Manuel and couldn't afford to respond to petty provocations. But Patricia's assault on Rosa's heritage, her intelligence, and her right to exist in their community as an equal human being had violated boundaries that Rosa would never allow anyone to cross without facing immediate and decisive consequences. The racist implications of Patricia's statement, combined with her suggestion that Rosa was somehow stealing from taxpayers, struck at the core of everything Rosa had worked to build during her decades of professional service and personal sacrifice. Rosa's hands slowly released their grip on the serving spoon she had been holding, her fingers straightening with the deliberate control of someone who had spent 15 years managing situations where split-second decisions could mean the difference between order and chaos. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly as years of prison experience kicked in, recognizing the moment when verbal aggression needed to be met with clear demonstration of consequences for unacceptable behavior. The children in the cafeteria sensed the change in atmosphere even if they didn't fully understand what had triggered it, their conversations fading to whispers as they watched Rosa step out from behind the serving counter with the fluid grace of someone who had never been intimidated by threats or insults from people who mistook privilege for power. Teachers throughout the cafeteria began moving toward the confrontation, instinctively understanding that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the normally peaceful environment of their elementary school. Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda had finally pushed Rosa Martinez beyond the limits of her professional restraint, crossing the line from annoying harassment to personal attack that demanded immediate response. They had assumed that their wealth and social status protected them from consequences, never imagining that they were about to face someone whose strength had been forged in environments where respect was earned through actions rather than inherited through bank account balances. Rosa Martinez stepped out from behind the serving counter with movements that carried 15 years of absolute authority earned in the most dangerous kitchen in the American correctional system. Her transition from patient service worker to commanding presence happened so smoothly that most observers didn't immediately recognize what they were witnessing. But Patricia Williams felt the shift in atmosphere like a sudden drop in barometric pressure that preceded violent storms. The cafeteria had fallen into the kind of complete silence that elementary schools rarely experience, with over 300 students and 24 adults instinctively understanding that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Rosa's footsteps on the polished linoleum floor seemed unnaturally loud as she approached the three women who had spent months systematically attempting to destroy her dignity and professional reputation through calculated campaigns of harassment and humiliation. Rosa's voice when she finally spoke carried none of the deferential politeness that Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda had grown accustomed to during their months of entitled behavior. Instead, her words emerged with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded respect from murderers, gang leaders, and violent criminals who would have laughed at the petty social intimidation tactics these privileged women considered powerful weapons. "Ladies," Rosa said, her tone remaining conversational while somehow conveying more genuine menace than any shouting could have achieved, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about respect, consequences, and the difference between actual authority and the kind of fake power that comes from inherited money and unearned privilege." Patricia Williams felt her confidence begin to waver as she looked into Rosa's eyes and saw something she had never encountered during her years of legal practice: intimidating opponents through aggressive tactics and superior resources. This wasn't the submissive service worker who had endured months of criticism without meaningful response. This was someone who radiated the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving challenges that would have broken most people completely. "For the past 8 months," Rosa continued, taking another measured step toward the three women while maintaining eye contact that made each of them increasingly uncomfortable, "you have treated me like your personal entertainment, using my Workplace as a stage where you could perform your superiority for audiences of other parents and children, who deserve better examples of how adults should behave toward one another. Jennifer Blackwell had built her entire adult identity around the assumption that her wealth and social connections made her untouchable by people she considered beneath her class. But Rosa's calm recitation of their behavior was making her realize that someone was finally going to hold her accountable for actions she had assumed would never face consequences. The blonde woman who had never heard the word no applied to any of her demands was beginning to understand that she had severely miscalculated the situation. "You have questioned my competence despite never having worked a single day in food service yourselves," Rosa said, her voice gaining strength as she drew upon memories of facing down men whose entire reputations were built on violence and intimidation. "You have criticized my appearance, my accent, my heritage, and my right to earn an honest living while contributing something meaningful to this community that your children are part of, whether you acknowledge it or not." Amanda Foster had spent her entire marriage hiding behind her husband's restaurant empire success, using his achievements to justify her own sense of superiority over people who actually worked in food service rather than simply marrying into it. But Rosa's steady advance was making Amanda realize that she had never actually earned the right to judge anyone's professional capabilities, having never demonstrated any skills beyond spending money that other people had earned through actual work. "But your mistake, your catastrophic, unforgivable mistake, was assuming that my patience represented weakness rather than strength," Rosa continued, her words carrying the weight of 15 years spent earning respect from people who could smell fear from across crowded rooms and would exploit any sign of vulnerability. Without mercy or hesitation, Rosa paused directly in front of Patricia Williams, close enough that the lawyer could see the absolute certainty in her eyes that consequences were about to be delivered for behavior that had crossed lines most people wouldn't even recognize existed. Patricia had built her career on intimidating opponents through legal knowledge and aggressive tactics, but she was beginning to understand that academic credentials meant nothing to someone who had survived challenges that law school had never prepared her to imagine. "Since you seem curious about my background and qualifications," Rosa said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper that somehow carried more authority than any shouting could have conveyed, "let me share some information that might help you understand exactly who you've been dealing with for the past 8 months. The entire cafeteria waited in breathless anticipation as Rosa prepared to reveal information that would transform everyone's understanding of the quiet woman they had watched serve lunch with professional efficiency while enduring systematic harassment from parents whose children she fed every day without complaint or retaliation. "My name is Rosa Elena Martinez, and for 15 years before coming to work at this elementary school, I was the head chef and kitchen manager at Riverside Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison that houses 2,800 of the most dangerous criminals in this state," Rosa announced, her words carrying across the silent cafeteria like stones dropped into still water. Patricia Williams felt her legs go weak as the implications of Rosa's revelation began to register in her consciousness. The woman she had been treating like an incompetent servant had spent a decade and a half managing violent felons in an environment where showing weakness could result in serious injury or death. "During my tenure at Riverside," Rosa continued, maintaining the same conversational tone while delivering information that was reshaping everyone's understanding of her capabilities, "I managed a kitchen staff of 42 convicted murderers, gang leaders, and violent offenders while preparing 3 meals daily for nearly 3,000 inmates and correctional staff." Jennifer Blackwell's face had gone pale as she realized that her months of condescending behavior had been directed toward someone whose daily routine had involved challenges that would have terrified most people into resignation within hours of beginning such work. "I maintained order in an environment where disagreements over food portions could trigger riots that left people hospitalized or dead," Rosa said, taking another step closer to the three women who were beginning to understand that they had made assumptions about someone whose strength had been tested under conditions they couldn't imagine surviving. Amanda Foster was backing away instinctively as Rosa's words painted a picture of professional experience that made her own claims to food service expertise seem laughably inadequate by comparison. The woman she had been criticizing for months had managed kitchen operations under pressure that would have broken most professional chefs within days. I earned the respect of men whose entire identities were built around violence and intimidation by demonstrating consistency, fairness, and absolute refusal to be intimidated by people who thought their reputations for brutality gave them power over others, Rosa continued, her revelation transforming the atmosphere in the cafeteria as students and teachers began to understand that they had been witnessing systematic harassment of someone whose qualifications far exceeded anything her tormentors could claim. I supervised food preparation for individuals serving life sentences for multiple homicides, organized crime leaders whose networks controlled drug distribution across multiple states, and psychopaths whose criminal histories would give you nightmares for months if you were capable of comprehending the depth of human evil that I dealt with professionally every single day for 15 years. Rosa's voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had faced genuine danger and emerged stronger, someone who had commanded respect from people, whose entire existence was dedicated to finding and exploiting weakness in others. The three privileged women who had spent months treating her like their personal entertainment were finally beginning to understand that they had been playing with forces completely beyond their comprehension or control. During my time at Riverside, I prevented 7 major kitchen riots through de-escalation techniques that required more courage and professional skill than anything you have ever accomplished in your comfortable lives, Rosa said, her words hitting like physical blows against the three women's assumptions about their own importance and capabilities. Patricia Williams was trembling now as she realized that her months of legal intimidation tactics had been directed toward someone who had faced down killers and psychopaths as part of her daily routine, someone who had earned authority through competence rather than inheriting it through family connections and inherited wealth. I received commendations from state corrections officials, was featured in professional publications for my innovative management techniques, and trained dozens of kitchen supervisors who implemented my methods at facilities across multiple states, Rosa continued, building a picture of professional achievement that dwarfed anything her critics had accomplished in their privileged lives. The revelation was transforming everyone's understanding of the dynamic they had witnessed over the previous months, showing them that Rosa's patience hadn't represented weakness, but rather the restraint of someone whose capabilities far exceeded the petty challenges presented by entitled parents, throwing tantrums over elementary school lunch service. So when you question my qualifications, criticize my methods, or suggest that I don't belong in your precious community, Rosa said, her words carrying the finality of someone delivering judgment rather than making threats, remember that you are dealing with someone who has earned respect from people who would consider your worst nightmares a normal Tuesday afternoon. The transformation of the Oakwood Elementary cafeteria into an arena of reckoning was complete as Rosa's revelation about her 15 years at Riverside Correctional Facility settled into the consciousness of everyone present. What had begun as another routine day of entitled parents harassing a perceived underdog had become something far more significant, a moment when privilege and assumed superiority collided head-on with genuine strength earned through surviving challenges that most people would never have the courage to face. Jennifer Blackwell, Patricia Williams, and Amanda Foster stood frozen in a tableau of dawning horror as they processed the implications of what Rosa had just revealed. The quiet lunch lady they had been systematically tormenting for months was someone whose daily routine had involved managing violent criminals, who would have considered their social intimidation tactics amusing distractions from serious business. The psychological weapons they had wielded with such confidence, condescension, legal threats, and social pressure were revealed as pathetically inadequate against someone whose authority had been forged in an environment where actual consequences for disrespect could be measured in blood and broken bones. Other parents throughout the cafeteria had begun pulling out their phones to record what they instinctively understood was an unprecedented confrontation. But their devices captured something far more complex than simple conflict between school staff and difficult parents. They were documenting the moment when artificial social hierarchy met authentic personal strength, when inherited privilege encountered earned respect, and when people who had never faced real adversity discovered what genuine toughness actually looked like. Students at tables throughout the expansive cafeteria watched with wide eyes as the adults in their world revealed layers of complexity that their young minds struggled to process completely. Many of these children had developed genuine affection for Rosa during her months of patient service, appreciating her kindness and the obvious care she put into preparing their meals. Now they were witnessing her transformation from gentle caregiver to formidable presence, learning that people they thought they understood completely could possess hidden depths that challenged their assumptions about strength and authority. Teachers positioned around the cafeteria found themselves caught between professional obligations to maintain order and personal fascination with watching someone they had come to respect finally confront the systematic harassment she had endured with remarkable grace. Sarah Chun, the third-grade teacher who had frequently witnessed Jennifer's cruel behavior, felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched Rosa's quiet revelation reshape the power dynamics that had made lunch periods uncomfortable for months. Principal Dr. Michael Thompson had been summoned by frantic phone calls from cafeteria staff, who recognized that something extraordinary was happening, but he arrived to find a situation that his administrative training had never prepared him to handle. The woman he had hired based on her impressive credentials and spotless employment record was revealing background information that cast her previous months of professional restraint in an entirely new light. While 3 of the school's most influential parents were experiencing public humiliation that could have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved, Rosa continued her methodical dismantling of the assumptions that had governed her treatment by these 3 women, drawing upon memories of confrontations with individuals whose capacity for violence made Patricia's legal threats seem like children's games. Her voice remained calm and controlled, but every word carried the weight of someone who had survived challenges that would have broken most people's spirit and emerged stronger rather than bitter. Marcus Rodriguez, serving life without parole for 3 homicides, once decided to test my authority by contaminating an entire batch of soup meant to feed 800 inmates, Rosa said, her words painting pictures of stakes that dwarfed any cafeteria disagreement about portion sizes or food temperature. When I looked him in the eyes and told him that his next act of sabotage would result in consequences he wouldn't enjoy, he understood that I wasn't making empty threats or relying on someone else's authority to back up my words. Patricia Williams felt her legal training abandoning her as she realized that Rosa's experience had involved situations where verbal intimidation could escalate to life-threatening violence within seconds. The aggressive tactics that had served Patricia well in real estate negotiations suddenly seemed absurdly inadequate against someone who had navigated confrontations where the stakes were measured in survival rather than contract terms or property values. Timothy Jackson, a drug kingpin whose network had controlled narcotics distribution across 3 states before his arrest, learned to follow my kitchen protocols exactly because he recognized that I treated him with the same professional respect I demanded in return, Rosa continued, building a picture of leadership that had nothing to do with inherited social status and everything to do with earning authority through consistent competence under pressure. Jennifer Blackwell's confidence in her own importance was crumbling as she listened to Rosa describe managing individuals whose criminal achievements dwarfed anything Jennifer had accomplished through her marriage to a successful businessman. The woman she had been treating like a servant had commanded respect from people who had built empires through intelligence and ruthlessness, making Jennifer's social manipulation tactics seem pathetically amateur by comparison. Carlos Mendoza, known as Viper throughout the correctional system for his reputation of violence that made even hardened gang members nervous, attempted to challenge my authority during his first week in my kitchen by deliberately creating dangerous situations that could have injured multiple people, Rosa said, her recitation of past confrontations serving as both explanation and warning to her current tormentors. Amanda Foster was backing toward the cafeteria exit as Rosa's words made clear that she had been criticizing someone whose professional qualifications included managing situations that would have sent Amanda running for security within minutes. The food service expertise that Amanda had claimed through her marriage to a restaurant owner was revealed as hollow pretension when measured against Rosa's actual experience feeding thousands of people under conditions where mistakes could trigger riots. When Viper knocked a full pot of scalding soup off the stove, endangering everyone in the immediate area, I didn't call for backup or retreat to safety, Rosa continued, her voice gaining strength as she drew upon memories of moments when her authority had been tested by people whose entire identities were built around intimidating others. I walked over to him, looked directly into his eyes, and told him to clean up the mess he had created. The three women who had spent months assuming that Rosa's quiet demeanor indicated weakness were discovering that her composure under their harassment had reflected the self-control of someone who had faced down genuine threats without flinching. Their petty cruelties and social intimidation tactics were being revealed as the amateur hour theatrics of people who had never encountered real consequences for their behavior. After 30 seconds of staring into eyes that had seen more genuine authority than he had ever encountered, this man whose reputation was built on violence quietly picked up a mop and began cleaning. Rosa said, delivering the conclusion of her story with the matter-of-fact tone of someone recounting routine professional accomplishments rather than extraordinary demonstrations of personal courage. Patricia Williams felt physically ill as she realized that Rosa's months of patient endurance hadn't represented inability to defend herself, but rather the restraint of someone whose capabilities far exceeded the challenges presented by entitled parents throwing tantrums over elementary school policies. The legal intimidation tactics that Patricia had considered devastating weapons were revealed as inconsequential annoyances to someone who had survived environments where real power was measured in entirely different terms. Viper never challenged my authority again, Rosa concluded, and within 6 months had become one of my most reliable workers because he finally encountered someone who showed him respect while demanding that he earn it through his actions rather than his reputation. For brutality, the silence in the cafeteria had become so complete that the humming of kitchen equipment seemed unnaturally loud as hundreds of people processed Rosa's revelation and its implications for everything they thought they understood about power, respect, and the assumptions they made about people based on their current circumstances, rather than their actual capabilities and experience. Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda were learning that their months of harassment had been directed toward someone whose daily routine had involved challenges that would have terrified them into immediate resignation, someone who had earned genuine authority through competence and courage rather than inheriting superficial status through family wealth and social connections. The confrontation had reached its climax, with Rosa's methodical revelation of her background serving as both explanation for her previous restraint and warning about what might happen if these three women continued their campaign of disrespect against someone whose patience had limits that they were dangerously close to exceeding. The moment when Rosa Martinez's true identity was fully revealed marked the complete reversal of every assumption that had governed the power dynamics at Oakwood Elementary School for the past 8 months. The three women who had built their campaign of harassment on the foundation of Rosa's perceived weakness now found themselves facing someone whose credentials included surviving challenges that would have broken their spirits within hours of beginning such work. Jennifer Blackwell's perfectly manicured hands began trembling as the full implications of Rosa's revelation settled into her consciousness. For 43 years, Jennifer had navigated the world with the absolute confidence that her wealth and social connections provided immunity from consequences for her behavior toward people she considered beneath her class. She had never encountered someone who possessed genuine authority, earned through competence rather than inherited through privilege, and Rosa's calm recitation of her prison experience was shattering every assumption Jennifer had made about their respective positions in the social hierarchy. The blonde woman who had spent months treating Rosa like personal entertainment was now discovering that she had been systematically harassing someone whose daily routine had involved managing individuals who would have considered Jennifer's social intimidation tactics amusing distractions from serious business. The realization that Rosa had earned respect from murderers and gang leaders, while Jennifer's own authority was entirely dependent on her husband's financial success, was creating a cognitive dissonance that Jennifer's privileged worldview couldn't process effectively. Patricia Williams felt her legal training abandoning her as she confronted the reality that her aggressive tactics had been directed toward someone whose experience included situations where verbal confrontations could escalate to life-threatening violence within seconds. Patricia had built her career on intimidating opponents through superior knowledge of regulations and aggressive interrogation techniques. But Rosa's background made clear that Patricia's courtroom victories had been achieved against people who were constrained by professional obligations and social conventions that didn't exist in maximum security prison environments. The attorney who had never lost a case was now facing someone who had maintained order among convicted killers without the protection of bailiffs, security guards, or legal procedures that Patricia relied upon to maintain her advantage in professional conflicts. Rosa's 15 years at Riverside Correctional Facility represented a form of legal and psychological education that Patricia's expensive law degree had never provided, teaching lessons about authority and consequence that Patricia was only beginning to understand. Amanda Foster's retreat toward the cafeteria exit had become increasingly frantic as Rosa's words painted a picture of food service management that made Amanda's claimed expertise seem laughably inadequate by comparison. Amanda had spent months criticizing Rosa's cooking methods based on knowledge gained through marriage to a restaurant owner, but Rosa's experience included feeding thousands of dangerous criminals under conditions where mistakes could trigger violent riots that left people permanently injured or dead. The woman who had considered herself qualified to evaluate Rosa's professional competence was discovering that she had never actually demonstrated any skills beyond spending money that other people had earned through genuine work. Amanda's restaurant connections had provided her with social status and secondhand knowledge, but Rosa had earned her authority through direct experience managing situations that would have sent Amanda running for security within minutes of beginning such responsibilities. The transformation of the cafeteria audience from passive observers to witnesses of something extraordinary continued as Rosa's revelation reshaped everyone's understanding of the harassment they had watched unfold over previous months. Students who had developed affection for Rosa during her patient service were learning that adults they thought they understood completely could possess hidden strengths that challenged their assumptions about power and authority in their world. Teachers throughout the cafeteria were experiencing their own revelations as they processed the implications of Rosa's background for everything they had witnessed during her employment at Oakwood Elementary. Sarah Chun, who had frequently observed Jennifer's cruel behavior during lunch periods, was realizing that Rosa's professional restraint hadn't represented inability to defend herself, but rather the self-control of someone whose capabilities far exceeded the challenges presented by entitled parents throwing tantrums over cafeteria policies. Other parents who had participated in or passively supported the harassment campaign were beginning to understand that they had been witnessing systematic cruelty, directed towards someone whose qualifications included surviving environments that would have terrified most people into immediate resignation. The social dynamics that had seemed entertaining when directed toward a perceived underdog were being revealed as pathetic displays of inherited privilege. Confronting authentic personal strength. Principal Dr. Michael Thompson stood frozen near the cafeteria entrance as he processed the implications of Rosa's revelation for his own administrative decisions over the previous months. He had hired Rosa based on her impressive credentials and spotless employment record, but he had chosen to avoid confrontation with influential parents rather than defending an employee whose background included achievements that dwarfed anything her critics had accomplished in their comfortable lives. The realization that he had allowed systematic harassment of someone who possessed genuine leadership experience while appeasing parents whose authority was entirely dependent on inherited wealth was forcing Dr. Thompson to confront uncomfortable truths about his own administrative priorities and the difference between actual competence and superficial social status that he had allowed to influence his professional judgment. Rosa's methodical dismantling of the assumptions that had governed her treatment continued as she drew upon specific memories of confrontations with individuals whose capacity for violence made her current situation seem almost surreal by comparison. Her voice maintained the same calm authority that had commanded respect from hardened criminals, but now she was applying those skills to educate 3 privileged women about the consequences of their months-long campaign of systematic disrespect. During my 15 years at Riverside, Rosa continued, her words carrying the weight of someone who had survived challenges that most people would never have the courage to face, I learned that genuine respect isn't something you can demand based on your family's bank account balance or your husband's professional success. Respect is something you earn through your actions, your consistency, and your ability to maintain your integrity when faced with people who mistake cruelty for strength. Jennifer Blackwell's face had gone ashen as Rosa's words struck at the core of everything Jennifer had believed about her own importance and the sources of her social authority. The woman who had never earned anything through her own efforts was being educated about the difference between authentic achievement and inherited privilege by someone whose credentials included accomplishments that Jennifer couldn't begin to comprehend. I learned that people who rely on intimidation and harassment to feel important are usually the weakest individuals in any environment, Rosa said, her words serving as both explanation and indictment of the behavior she had endured with remarkable patience. The truly dangerous people I worked with every day understood that real power comes from competence and self-control, not from making others feel small to inflate your own ego. Patricia Williams felt physically nauseous as Rosa's calm analysis of intimidation tactics exposed the shallow foundation of Patricia's own professional methods. The attorney who had built her career on aggressive confrontation was learning that her techniques were considered amateur theatrics by someone who had faced genuine threats without flinching or retreating to the safety of legal procedures and professional constraints. The inmates who earned my respect were those who understood that following protocols and maintaining professional standards wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather evidence of the strength required to function effectively in a complex environment where everyone's safety depended on consistent adherence to established procedures. Rosa continued, building a picture of leadership philosophy that challenged every assumption her tormentors had made about authority and control. Amanda Foster's retreat had brought her to the cafeteria's main entrance, but she found herself unable to leave as Rosa's words forced her to confront the reality that her months of criticism had been directed toward someone whose professional qualifications included managing challenges that Amanda couldn't imagine surviving. The woman who had questioned Rosa's cooking methods was learning that Rosa's experience included feeding thousands of people under pressure that would have broken most professional chefs within days. The men who failed in my kitchen were those who confused volume with authority, who thought that making threats or displaying aggression would somehow compensate for their lack of actual competence. Rosa said, her description of failed leadership, serving as a mirror that reflected the tactics Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda had employed during their harassment campaign. The three women were discovering that every strategy they had used to intimidate Rosa, condescension, legal threats, social pressure, and public humiliation, were techniques that Rosa recognized as signs of weakness rather than strength. Based on her experience with individuals whose capacity for both violence and leadership far exceeded anything these privileged parents could comprehend. But the most important lesson I learned during my years at Riverside, Rosa said, her voice gaining strength as she prepared to deliver the culmination of her educational presentation, was that people who mistake patience for weakness usually discover their error when they finally push someone beyond the limits of professional restraint. The silence in the cafeteria had become so complete that Rosa's words seemed to echo off the walls as hundreds of people processed the implications of what they were witnessing. This wasn't simply a confrontation between school staff and difficult parents. It was a moment when authentic strength confronted artificial authority, when earned respect challenged inherited privilege, and when someone who had survived genuine adversity finally set boundaries for people who had never faced real consequences for their actions. Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda were learning that Rosa's months of quiet endurance hadn't represented inability to defend herself, but rather the restraint of someone whose capabilities far exceeded the petty challenges they had presented. Their systematic campaign of harassment was being revealed as the amateur hour performance of people who had never encountered someone whose strength had been tested under conditions where mistakes could be measured in terms of survival rather than social embarrassment. The power reversal was complete as Rosa's revelation transformed her from perceived victim to recognized authority, while her three tormentors were exposed as shallow bullies whose confidence had been built on assumptions that were crumbling under the weight of reality. The confrontation had reached its climax, with genuine strength finally asserting itself against artificial superiority in a demonstration that would reshape the social dynamics at Oakwood Elementary School permanently. The moment when privilege met authentic authority had arrived, and the results were reshaping everyone's understanding of power, respect, and the assumptions they made about people based on superficial observations rather than actual knowledge of their capabilities and experience. The silence that followed Rosa's revelation stretched across the Oakwood Elementary cafeteria like the calm before a storm breaks, with hundreds of people processing the complete transformation of everything they thought they understood about the quiet woman who had served their children lunch for 8 months. The moment had arrived when consequences would finally be delivered for behavior that had crossed every line of human decency and professional respect, administered by someone whose qualifications for such judgment had been earned through surviving challenges that her tormentors couldn't begin to comprehend. Jennifer Blackwell found her voice first, but the words that emerged carried none of the confident arrogance that had characterized her previous interactions with Rosa. We didn't know," she stammered, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of understanding that she had been systematically harassing someone whose background included accomplishments that dwarfed anything Jennifer had achieved through her privileged existence. The blonde woman who had never apologized for anything in her adult life was discovering what genuine humility felt like when confronted with authentic authority. Patricia Williams stood frozen as her legal training abandoned her completely, leaving her without the aggressive tactics that had served as her primary tools for controlling situations throughout her professional career. The attorney who had built her reputation on intimidating opponents through superior knowledge and ruthless interrogation was face to face with someone whose experience included managing individuals who would have considered Patricia's courtroom victories amusing distractions from serious business involving life and death consequences. Amanda Foster had backed against the cafeteria wall, her retreat blocked by the crowd of parents and teachers who had gathered to witness this unprecedented Confrontation between inherited privilege and earned strength. The woman who had questioned Rosa's professional competence based on secondhand knowledge gained through marriage was learning that her months of criticism had been directed towards someone whose qualifications included feeding thousands of dangerous criminals under conditions that would have sent Amanda running for security. Within minutes, Rosa's response to their belated recognition of their error carried the same calm authority that had commanded respect from murderers and gang leaders, but now it was being applied to deliver justice. For months of systematic harassment that had tested even her remarkable patience. "Your ignorance of my background doesn't excuse your behavior," she said, her voice maintaining the conversational tone that somehow conveyed more genuine menace than any shouting could have achieved. Respect for other human beings shouldn't require knowledge of their resume or fear of their capabilities. The three women who had built their harassment campaign on assumptions about Rosa's weakness were now learning that their months of cruelty had been observed and cataloged by someone whose experience included dealing with individuals whose capacity for both violence and manipulation far exceeded anything these privileged parents could imagine. Rosa had survived 15 years in an environment where showing mercy to bullies could result in escalating aggression that endangered everyone under her protection. For 8 months, you have treated this cafeteria like your personal theater where you could perform your superiority for audiences of children and parents who deserved better examples of how adults should interact with one another. Rosa continued, her words serving as both indictment and education for people who had never been held accountable for behavior they had assumed was protected by their social status and financial influence. Dr. Michael Thompson stepped forward from his position near the cafeteria entrance, finally understanding that his months of avoiding confrontation with influential parents had enabled systematic harassment of an employee whose background included leadership achievements that far exceeded anything her critics had accomplished. The principal who had chosen administrative convenience over professional integrity was now witnessing the consequences of his failure to protect someone who had earned respect through competence rather than inherited it through family wealth. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was finally prepared to fulfill his responsibilities as an educational leader. "I owe you an apology for allowing this harassment to continue without intervention. Your professional qualifications and personal character deserve far better treatment than you have received at this institution." Students throughout the cafeteria watched with wide eyes as the adult authority figures in their world revealed layers of complexity that challenged their understanding of strength, respect, and justice. Many of these children had developed genuine affection for Rosa during her months of patient service, and now they were witnessing her transformation from gentle caregiver to formidable presence, who commanded attention through authentic authority rather than artificial intimidation. Rosa's gaze swept across the three women who had made her professional life miserable, while she maintained her focus on the primary responsibility that had brought her to Oakwood Elementary, providing nutritious meals for over 1,000 children while maintaining the employment that allowed her to care for Manuel during his battle with Alzheimer's disease. Her commitment to protecting what mattered most had given her the strength to endure their harassment, but it also provided the motivation for ensuring that such behavior would never be repeated. "Jennifer," Rosa said, addressing the ringleader of the harassment campaign with the same calm directness she had used when confronting violent criminals who mistook her composure for weakness. "Your daughters Emma and Sophie deserve a mother who demonstrates integrity and respect for others, not someone who teaches them that wealth provides license to treat service workers as personal entertainment." Jennifer Blackwell felt tears beginning to form as Rosa's words struck at her deepest fears about the example she was setting for her children. The woman who had never considered the impact of her behavior on anyone beyond herself was being forced to confront the reality that her daughters had been watching and learning from her months of systematic cruelty toward someone who had never done anything to deserve such treatment. Patricia, Rosa continued, turning her attention to the attorney, who had attempted to use legal intimidation as a weapon against someone whose experience included surviving environments where such tactics were considered childish games. Your son Bradley needs a mother who demonstrates that intelligence and education should be used to build others up rather than tear them down through aggressive behavior that mistakes volume for authority. Patricia Williams collapsed into a nearby chair as Rosa's words forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth that her professional success had been built on tactics that Rosa recognized as signs of weakness rather than strength. The attorney, who had never lost a case, was learning that her courtroom victories had been achieved against opponents who were constrained by rules and procedures that didn't exist in the environments where Rosa had earned her authority. "Amanda," Rosa said, completing her individual attention to each member of the trio who had made her life miserable. "Your daughter Madison deserves a mother who understands that criticism without knowledge is simply cruelty disguised as expertise, and that authentic authority comes from competence rather than inherited social status." Amanda Foster began sobbing as Rosa's calm assessment of her behavior forced her to confront the reality that her months of harassment had been based on arrogance and ignorance rather than any legitimate concern for educational standards or child welfare. The woman who had considered herself qualified to evaluate Rosa's professional performance was learning that her credentials consisted entirely of second-hand knowledge, gained through marriage rather than actual experience. The transformation of the cafeteria atmosphere was complete as Rosa's revelation and subsequent education of her tormentors reshaped everyone's understanding of the power dynamics that had governed their interactions for months. Parents who had participated in or passively supported the harassment campaign were beginning to understand that they had been witnessing systematic cruelty directed toward someone whose qualifications included surviving challenges that would have broken their spirits within hours. Teachers throughout the cafeteria felt a mixture of admiration and embarrassment as they processed Rosa's background and their own failure to intervene more effectively when they witnessed her harassment. Sarah Chun approached Rosa with tears in her eyes, finally understanding that the quiet strength she had observed during difficult lunch periods had been forged in environments where maintaining composure could mean the difference between order and chaos. "Rosa," Sarah said, her voice carrying the respect that should have been extended months earlier, "I'm ashamed that we allowed this treatment to continue. Your patience and professionalism have been extraordinary, and these children are fortunate to have someone with your integrity, preparing their meals and setting an example of how to handle adversity with dignity." Other staff members began approaching Rosa with similar expressions of support and apology, creating a circle of respect around someone who had finally been recognized for her true capabilities and character. The social dynamics that had allowed systematic harassment were being replaced by genuine appreciation for someone whose background included achievements that commanded respect rather than inherited status that demanded deference. The three women who had orchestrated months of harassment found themselves isolated as other parents distanced themselves from behavior that was now revealed as systematic cruelty directed toward someone whose qualifications far exceeded those of her critics. Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda were learning that their assumed immunity from consequences had been an illusion, based on the restraint of someone whose capabilities they had completely misunderstood. Rosa's final words to her former tormentors carried the weight of someone who had earned the right to deliver judgment through surviving challenges that had tested every aspect of her character and competence. "This ends now," she said, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had commanded respect from individuals whose capacity for violence and leadership far exceeded anything these privileged parents could comprehend. "You will treat me and every other person who works at this school with the respect that human beings deserve, regardless of their job title or your assumptions about their background." The confrontation that had begun with three entitled women expecting to continue their systematic harassment of a perceived underdog had concluded with their complete humiliation and the revelation that they had been targeting someone whose strength and authority were authentic rather than artificial. The power reversal was permanent, establishing new dynamics that would govern interactions at Oakwood Elementary for years to come. The moment when genuine strength finally asserted itself against inherited privilege had reshaped everyone's understanding of respect, authority, and the dangerous assumptions people make about others, based on superficial observations rather than actual knowledge of their capabilities and character. Rosa Martinez had not only survived her confrontation with systematic harassment, but had transformed it into an educational experience that would benefit everyone who witnessed her demonstration of how authentic authority responds to artificial intimidation. The weeks that followed Rosa's revelation transformed Oakwood Elementary into a completely different environment. Jennifer, Patricia, and Amanda had quietly withdrawn from school activities, their influence evaporating like morning mist. Other parents began greeting Rosa with genuine respect, and several approached her privately to apologize for their previous silence during the harassment. Dr. Thompson implemented new policies protecting all school staff from parent harassment, citing Rosa's situation as a wake-up call about the importance of maintaining professional dignity for everyone who served the school community. He also recommended Rosa for the district's Excellence in Service Award, which she received at a ceremony attended by her former colleagues from Riverside Correctional Facility. The most meaningful change came from the students themselves. Children, who had witnessed Rosa's quiet strength, began treating all school staff with increased respect, understanding that everyone deserved dignity regardless of their job title. Emma and Sophie Blackwell, Jennifer's twin daughters, became some of Rosa's most ardent defenders, having learned from their mother's humiliation that true strength comes from character rather than wealth. Manuel's condition continued to deteriorate, but Rosa's newfound respect at work gave her strength to handle the challenges at home. Her colleagues now understood why she sometimes seemed distant during difficult days, and they offered support that helped her maintain the balance between professional responsibilities and personal caregiving. The cafeteria had become a place where respect flowed in all directions, where children learned that the people who served them possessed depths of experience and wisdom that weren't always visible on the surface. If this story of hidden strength and delayed justice inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments about times when you've witnessed someone's true character emerge under pressure. Don't forget to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate stories about authentic strength triumphing over artificial authority.